Hi there. As RE4 released to planet-cracking success, Capcom's fate was sealed. For how intense and genuinely terrifying RE4 was at times, what stood out the most to players were its over-the-top action set pieces, extremely fun action-packed battles, and total goofball one-liner dropping main characters. The course of this legendary franchise was set in stone from that game onward. Resident Evil would become a high-octane action horror series. While mostly everyone loved the game, it did deviate quite a bit from what made the series what it was: survival horror. While fans were enjoying Leon Kennedy's wild ride through haunted Spain, a particular someone else was also going on a journey of his own. Artist and video game dev Glenn Schofield. Schofield's career spans decades at this point, starting with Barbie Game Girl in the early 90s, to directing an entry in one of my favorite gothic horror franchises, The Legacy of Kain. The man has a lot of range in terms of creativity and the right amount of skill for video game development. Throughout the early 2000s, Schofield worked for EA Redwood Shores, developing a ton, and I mean a ton, of licensed games for EA. Hot off the release of 007 From Russia with Love, and just having played RE4 for the first time, one thought crossed Schofield's mind. Hey, I think I could make this game scarier. Having enough clout at EA and being a massive Resident Evil fan, he and executive producer Michael Condrey decided to pitch a brand new IP. A horror game set on the moon, starring a prisoner surviving hordes of mutated monsters. This early concept is codenamed Rancid Moon and is often described as Escape from New York on the moon. Not many of the staffers working on this project liked the prisoner aspect of this game, but loved the space setting. So narrative team Warren Ellis, Rick Remender, and Anthony Johnston came up with a basic story, characters, and even objectives that the player would have to complete for this hypothetical sci-fi horror game. This title almost switching effortlessly to being about a very human engineer surviving inside of a massive spaceship against twisted abominations. The story was so essential in the pre-production phase that the basic objectives of the game had to align with the title's narrative. Those goals being to repair the ship and escape. With these new story concepts in mind, this title had some obvious inspirations. Films like Event Horizon, Alien, and most importantly, The Thing would help establish the vibe the team wanted to achieve. In all of their research, Redwood Shores would watch tons of movies, from sci-fi, horror, and horror sci-fi. One movie that so inspired Glenn Schofield was a borderline should-be-banned-in-all-countries film called Martyrs. After viewing Martyrs myself, I was hit with a permanent, nihilistic, depressive debuff that hasn't worn off ever since. Don't watch that movie. Save yourself. Schofield actually watched a lot of Japanese and European horror films and absolutely loved how they so often ended hopelessly. Very rarely did those characters escape, mostly dying in over-the-top fashion. Adding that specific layer of hopelessness that you'd find in something like a Miike film was very important for the type of horror this game was going for. For the gameplay, it was simple. Schofield, being a hardcore Resident Evil fan, would tell his team quite frequently, "Think Resident Evil in space." What's interesting is executive producer Michael Condrey and other game designers actually wanted to make something a little more System Shock feeling before Schofield got the ball rolling with the RE4 comparison. RE4 was new and successful, and something you could just point to and be like, yeah, we want to make a next-gen sci-fi scarier version of that. The game's gore and dismemberment tech was a big focus. It actually started with just stomping enemies into bloody pieces, eventually evolving into a strategic dismemberment system that would affect foes in a variety of ways. The Thing was the most prevalent inspiration for the enemies stalking the halls of this abandoned ship, equipped with a lot of twisted flesh and bone in their designs, making for some truly terrifying and disturbing monsters. Beasts cosmic in nature, making almost no sense, but so very human on the surface. The ship environment would be labyrinthine, much like a Resident Evil or Silent Hill level, with a look and feel of the Nostromo from Alien with a dab of Event Horizon for safekeeping. Reaching ever closer to completion, Schofield and his team were not just making good progress, but actually achieving mostly every design and story goal they set out to complete, even getting a letter from Sony congratulating them on clearing every major bug pre-release. This title would even release 2 weeks earlier than its projected launch date. That's how ready this game was, which isn't something that's ever really happened before or after its release. This ambitious love letter to horror games and movies that Redwood Shores had been developing for 3 long years was finally announced in 2007 as
Isaac, it's me. I wish I could talk to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about everything. I wish I could just talk to someone. It's all falling apart here. I can't believe what's happening. It's strange. Such a little thing.
How many times you watched that thing? Guess you really miss her. Don't worry, we're almost there. You'll be able to look her up once we're on board.
Dead Space begins with engineer Isaac Clarke, chief of security Zach Hammond, and computer tech specialist Kendra Daniels looking for the lost mining space vessel known as the USG Ishimura. In the year 2508, humanity's homeworld, Earth, has run out of natural resources, forcing us to take to the stars in search of other planets rich for mining. The Ishimura, one of many gigantic spacecrafts designed to break open and extract tectonic lodes full of natural resources, has mysteriously gone offline. Currently orbiting the planet Aegis 7 after completing a successful planet crack, the Ishimura's crew unearths some kind of ancient artifact. The ship's communication systems slowly went out after this successful mission. Our crew clearly aren't friends, judging by the intensity of their idle chit-chat.
So that's Ishimura. Impressive.
The USG Ishimura, biggest planet cracker in her class.
You're gonna need to boost the signal if her power's low.
Yes, we know. Boost the signal. More.
As our ship, the USG Kellyan, approaches the Ishimura, its engines begin to fail, forcing a hard dock into the massive vessel. After yelling at each other one more time, our crew rig up and head inside the quiet ship. The first thing you'll probably notice about this hub is its distinct lack of life. No one's around, not even ship security welcoming us in. Kendra and Hammond keep yelling at each other, looking for a way into the ship's tram station.
Get that elevator back online.
Power's dead. I can't.
Then reroute the damn power! Look, if we all cooperate, we can figure this out a lot sooner. Let's get that computer display up, Isaac.
After pulling up a damage report, we discover the tram system's offline. So that's our goal. Get that fixed, gain access to the ship. Before we head off, an emergency quarantine sequence begins as we hear things crawling around in the walls. Suddenly, the ceiling of the lobby collapses as fleshy, bladed monsters begin tearing the crew apart. It doesn't take long for them to get into our room as a tense chase begins. Outrunning the monsters, Isaac reaches an elevator. Descending deeper into the ship, we find a bloody scene. The corpse of a man, an industrial handheld plasma cutter, and a message written in blood on the wall. Cut off their limbs. As we try leaving the room, another bladed monster jumps us, but we make short work of it, dismembering the creature, disabling its means of attack. As we make our way down a dark, cold hallway, we find ourselves in the tram station's control room. We get a call from Hammond and Kendra, who thankfully escaped the early scramble. The tram system's data board is fried, and a busted car is blocking the track. Our goal is to get all of that fixed, immediately communicating to us that we are an engineer first and a fighter second. Exploring the continuous cramped corridors of this space station creates one hell of an impressive atmosphere. The sounds of clanking metal, engines and pistons working in the machinery surrounding us, the distant screams and low voices whispering, shadows passing by doorways and around corners. You feel like you're in a space you shouldn't be wandering through. Slowly walking through all of this quiet, building tension perfectly comes to a climax when an enemy does show up. oftentimes screaming so loudly in your face, rushing you with a barrage of attacks, snapping the tension and your concentration in half. Repairing the tram station is easier said than done as hordes of monsters continue pursuing Isaac. Clearing the wreckage from the track and finding a fresh data board, we escape back to the tram control room. We get Kendra and Hammond to safety, and Isaac begins heading back to the Kellyan. As we make it back to the small ship, it's overrun with monsters, resulting in a power malfunction, blowing the ship up in the process. With no other options, Isaac and the remaining crew head deeper into the Ishimura in the hopes of finding any survivors and escaping this nightmare world, thus beginning the story of Dead Space. We'll continue exploring the multiple plot lines of this title later, but for now, let's get into the gameplay. So Dead Space is 100% survival horror. You're dealing with limited items like heals and ammo, hub zones, light puzzle solving, an upgradable inventory, you've got a helpful map, save points, tons of files to read, listen to, and watch, and powerful enemies that'll shrug off a lot of damage before going down. One of my favorite things about Dead Space is Isaac's tank-like movement, and I'm not talking about tank controls. This title obviously uses omnidirectional control, and you can attack while moving, but the devs clearly inhibit your movement in subtle ways as to not make you feel like a capable killing machine. Isaac's engineer power armor always reminded me of a vintage diving suit. His sluggish movement sells the idea that this guy is wearing a suit designed to withstand a lot of trauma on the job. Whether it's designed against flesh maces, blade tentacles, or projectile stomach acid is another story. Controls are solid, but like I mentioned, kinda sluggish. It's like you and Isaac have to get used to moving around and fighting in this big suit. It's a very particular feeling that not many games can pull off successfully, but Dead Space does, and it adds to the horror the title's going for. Nothing better represents what I'm describing than Isaac's punch animation. You can tell this guy mines rock and repairs circuit boards for a living. He is not a fighter. A simple punch is him using all of his physical strength to swing his arms. That's what makes it even cooler when you eventually do get the control feel down, because you'll notice the difference in how you played at the start to how you've evolved in the mid to late game. This feeling is so classically survival horror and makes me very happy. It's interesting because early in development, director Schofield wanted to get Isaac's movement and animations in parity with Leon's from RE4. Once they achieved a perfect sync between both characters, strafing and moving while aiming was implemented. I'm sure you guys probably noticed something cool with that little story I just told. RE4 basically has that same control progression. In RE4, Leon controls in a stiff, inorganic way, but once you get all of his controls down, you become a straight killer by the midway point or even earlier. RE4 being the basis for Dead Space to innovate on with its own combat mechanics was a great idea for improving upon the survival horror formula. It's a familiar glove that's easy to put on but requires a bit of mastery to fully break in. We can't talk about Isaac's suit without talking about Dead Space's diegetic heads-up display. So one thing that made classic survival horror games so immersive were their lack of user interface. You never got any ammo counters or HP bars. You and your character were in the game. In Dead Space, all relevant info is displayed either on Isaac or his equipment. Want to know what HP you're at? Just look at the lights on your back. Want to know how much ammo you have? Aim your weapon. Diegesis in video games can be hard to achieve, but Dead Space nails what it's going for. It's an innovative and natural way to communicate vital information to the player without removing them from the experience. Isaac's inventory screen and video calls are even displayed out of a projector on his chest. So if you move while looking at this stuff, you'll see that it's all flat holograms. Every part of the game that isn't the pause screen is happening in the physical game world. There's no stopping the action even if enemies are attacking. It's all in service to connecting you to the character better, and it's honestly phenomenal. Off topic, but I absolutely love power armor, and that's kinda why I'm going off about Isaac's. I love how it looks like a diving suit at the start, and as you upgrade it, it gets more alien and ribby, like an insect. It's not every day we get power armored survival horror games, so I'm kinda gushing at this thing's overall design. One thing a friend pointed out to me recently is when you upgrade Isaac's suit armor, a sectioned off light is added to Isaac's back. These upgrades allow him to take more damage, getting you into the heat of battle more often, facing your fears. You're literally growing a spine. One other thing that brilliantly plays into Isaac being a normal construction worker are the weapons he uses throughout the game. They aren't weapons at all. They're actually engineer's tools, mining equipment, and cutting implements to be exact. The starting blaster, the iconic plasma cutter, is the most versatile weapon in your kit, featuring a rotating projector that can cut in all kinds of ways. You can do full playthroughs with this one tool alone. The Ripper is a remote-controlled circular saw launching a spinning blade, keeping it in mid-air till whatever it's chopping stops moving. The Force Gun is kinda like a shotgun, blasting a wave of heavy impact energy at whatever twisted fool stands in your way. The Line Gun is like a giant plasma cutter, but it can't rotate. Instead, its alternate fire shoots out a sticky landmine. There's tons of variety to your offensive options, and most tools have game-changing alternate fire modes to help spice up the basic combat loop. You can actually find one real firearm, that being the pulse rifle. It's arguably the worst weapon out of the box, which makes sense since mostly all of the security staff on the Ishimura were armed with guns, and they all bit the dust hard. The pulse rifle has probably the coolest alt fire I have ever seen in a video game, however, an attack I like to call the fuck everything button. Each and every weapon can be upgraded with single-use power nodes found throughout the game. Damage output, reload speed, fire rate, the usual. This game is so scary, even the weapon bench growls at you like a demon. Every weapon has an upgrade tree, so upgrading is fairly linear. Interestingly enough, on normal mode, I only needed to start upgrading my stuff at around the halfway point of the story. That's when the game starts locking you into combat encounters more often. Before that, you can run away from most battles, like a traditional survival horror game. Which, speaking of enemy encounters, let's talk about arguably the most important thing in Dead Space, the necromorphs. These twisted humanoid abominations are persistent and deadly. As we saw in the intro, a necromorph's ultimate weakness is its deadliest weapon, its body. Using Isaac's tools, we have to cut away at each enemy we come across. Dismembering slows a necromorph down, dealing extra damage and altering how they function in combat. The dismemberment system was very revolutionary for its time, with the amount of limbs flying around in any given battle.
Really took the physics really far. Because dismemberment was so important to the game, like I said before, it informed what just about everything looked like. And so, like, the weapons had to be able to cut those things off, and then the frame rate with the weapon, gosh, I remember when some of the weapons spinning and them coming on, and the frame rate issues that we had. Number one issue was frame rate with dismemberment. And them getting caught in places. Some of them were really funny. But, you know, the last time I saw a funny horror movie, I wasn't that scared.
There's tons of enemy variety, with the basic slasher enemies that go down quick but usually travel in hordes. The nightmare baby lurkers with their triple projectile tentacles. The pregnant necro, which will give birth to smaller creatures when damaging its stomach. And the high-flying leapers remind me of RE's lickers for some reason. All enemy types have specific limb weaknesses, and it's targeting these weaknesses that brings the most tension and challenge to every combat encounter. Focusing on such surgical tactics while a group of 5 monsters straight out of your worst nightmares bum rush you is hella tense. And those are just the basic creatures. There are advanced necromorphs like the Infectors, which will create new dark slasher variants out of seemingly innocent dead bodies that are a lot stronger than the normal ones. The Exploders have one massive tumor-like arm that explodes and can also be used against the enemy if you manage to cut it off. They also make an amazing sound, by the way. The Divider is a tall Mr. X wannabe who falls apart when dismembered. Of course, with each detached limb becoming its very own enemy. It's probably the coolest monster in the game, and just one of the coolest horror game creatures in general. Defeated necromorphs will most of the time drop you items. Whether those be ammo, heals, or money is random, kinda like RE4. I love this detail because all of the monsters you're putting down were once human, so it makes sense that they'd have things like money on them. Some of them are still wearing clothes. Some of them were medical staff. So a heal dropping from a slasher makes a lot of sense. Enemies will also follow you between rooms, making for quite the persistent challenge. By the way, I don't mean one enemy. I mean like, if you ran away from a full encounter, all of those creeps will use any available air vents, doors, or walls to stalk you. It's actually really impressive running out of a room, hearing the music go quiet, and then 3 previous slashers run at you from around a corner, while 2 others will drop down from the ceiling. There's a lot going on in Dead Space, and while it's all really well made, I do feel that the dismemberment magic kinda wears off faster than it should. After disarming your 20th slasher, things basically become a flowchart. Aim for the knee, drop them. Aim for the arm, they're dead. Rinse and repeat. This only gets easier as you upgrade your weapons too. Sometimes monsters will die with a single blast. The game does a great job at mixing things up with multiple types of enemies appearing in single encounters, and the aforementioned darker variants of each monster require more ammo to go down. I still think the enemy encounters can get repetitive, but thankfully this isn't like a 30-hour game. It's like 8 to 10 hours long. So before you start getting tired of samey battles, the title doesn't even overstay its welcome. Some enemies are so fast that you have to literally slow them down with Isaac's special stasis device. Stasis is an engineering tool used to slow down and repair high-speed machinery, but it sure does help in bullying overzealous necromorphs. Stasis works against every enemy and is quite overpowered after fully upgrading its capacity and freeze duration. Strategic use of stasis is key in surviving most encounters on the higher difficulties. On my impossible playthrough, Dead Space's hardest difficulty setting, I found myself having to backtrack to stasis recharge stations across a level just to successfully get through certain battles. It was a cool feeling, conquering an area, but then struggling, having to open my map to find this valuable resource and charge up. It's very survival horror. It actually reminded me of playing Remake, finding fuel for my canteen to burn down zombies. Isaac's other special tool is his kinesis module, which helps workers lift extremely large and heavy objects with ease. You can also lift and chuck said heavy objects at necromorphs, smushing them into a fine paste. The upgrades for kinesis are its distance, which isn't all that special. What is special is dismembering, say, an exploder, for example, then kinesising its malformed arm and throwing it at a group of enemies. Yeah, an even finer paste. The Ishimura is littered with shops with a variety of items for sale. Ammo, heals, air canisters, weapons, and upgraded armor sets. Most items unlock through finding schematics out in the field. You have to seek out an item to stock in the shop, much like finding nodes to upgrade your weapons or suit. It's sort of like an upgrade tree that you unlock as you progress. The shop also doubles as an RE-style item box, letting you bank items and stacks of ammo. Since Isaac has a limited inventory, stashing away your items and clearing space for finding more is essential in not finding yourself in a sticky combat situation. Shops are mostly found around save points, making them feel a lot like classic RE save rooms. You wear those inspirations on your sleeve, Dead Space. You know I love to see it. Dead Space is a game split into open-ended chapters. Every level has you searching a part of the ship, finding and repairing some giant component. The game's level design is pretty great. Backtracking, puzzles, finding key items, consulting maps, and making your own mental ones based on in-game landmarks and signage. There are tons of side rooms and closets that'll reward you with extra items and resources to sell at the expense of upgrade nodes, creating a bit of risk-reward through exploration. The levels feel so much like classic RE environments that Redwood Shores just straight up use RE music in certain encounters. You didn't think I'd notice that, huh, Jason Graves? If that is your real name. I'm just kidding. The music in Dead Space and every other game you've done is really cool, and I appreciate your work. The way hallways and rooms are laid out feel so classically survival horror, like areas from RE and Silent Hill. What Dead Space does to stand out is having more space-themed scenarios. Zero-G navigation with Isaac's mag boots allow him to stand on walls and ceilings, getting a new perspective on combat and puzzles. Some parts of the ship itself are overtaken by this necromorph threat, the floor and walls literally being covered in a bioorganic material, slowing down one's movement. There are also areas that don't have oxygen, some malfunctioning sectors of the ship, and full outer space set pieces. These areas create a lot of tension, with Isaac needing to desperately restore his suit's built-up limited supply of air. You can replenish this on the fly with disposable air cans or visit an air station. Some rooms have damaged floor panels with exposed gravity plating, creating physics-based minefields that you have to carefully navigate as to not be shot up into the ceiling. Dead Space uses moments like this to create some really fun mechanical replayability. One might enter a room like this and tiptoe around these distorted floor panels. Others might use, say, the Force Gun to force necromorphs into these zones, smashing them to pieces. It's really satisfying. The game does a great job at mixing up these areas so you're not spending too much time in or out of them. It's really well paced. The puzzles littered throughout the Ishimura aren't difficult, but feel like legit engineer work that would happen in this sci-fi future setting. It's great playing as this everyman engineer, surviving while fixing. Being in this heavy suit, doing a balancing act of fighting while swapping out giant satellites, fixing power cells, or removing biohazardous material. It all had me so immersed in Isaac's adventure. What didn't have me immersed was the absolutely terrible asteroid shooting minigame. It can only be described as pace-shattering. You might die over and over again to this thing, or you might skill it in one shot. No matter what happens, you'll be frustrated. I can promise you that much. Firing a turret at small targets, dragging the crosshair from side to side, emulating mouse movement, feels terrible on a controller. I'll save you some time though, and give you a bit of a hint. Keep the crosshair in the center of the field. Just focus on whatever's coming directly at you, and ignore the stragglers on the sides of the screen. I can't help you with the second minigame where you have to battle a monster with this horrible cannon, so yeah, you're on your own with that one. Before I complain more about one specific thing Dead Space does, I want to praise how highly detailed the Ishimura's environments are. A lot of this game is dark, industrial, bloody, forgotten metal hallways and rooms. But for every one of those, there are some drop-dead gorgeous areas like the medical wing, captain's cabin, various crew quarters, and exterior ship set pieces that left such an incredible impression on me throughout my playthroughs. Like any other great survival horror game, or just a good video game in general, Dead Space has its memorable moments and areas. You're not getting the same two things over and over. As you progress, so does the game world. The wider aesthetic of specific areas and set pieces aren't the Ishimura's only captivating visual traits. The attention to detail extends into smaller things too. Pretty much every door to any room has a sign above it letting you know exactly where you're going, like any real-world building. There's tons of environmental storytelling with places like the medical wards, for example, looking like a legit crisis zone, body bags stacked up, and evidence of the ship's staff losing their minds, leading to rioting. Whenever I say things like a game's world feels lived in, I mean that tenfold for the Ishimura. This ship is one of the most detailed and well-realized places ever created in a game. It's all really well made and natural to navigate, and sounds fantastic. I forgot if I mentioned it, but everything in this game sounds amazing. Special shoutouts to everyone that helped create the sounds of Dead Space. It's truly a masterclass in audio design. The thing that kinda deflates Dead Space's survival horror vibe is its waypoint and map system. Hitting the waypoint button projects a holographic line pointing you in the direction of your objective. A cool in-universe device that helps both Isaac and the player get back on track, that also partially removes your sense of discovery. I feel it lessens the satisfaction of finding unique or even hidden areas. Admittedly, this feature is optional. Never once does the game display an on-screen waypoint, but the thing about survival horror games that I love the most is stumbling around the dark using my map and whatever's in the world itself to find my way. The map system is really cool at first glance. It is, once again, projected out of Isaac's suit in 3D. It takes some getting used to, figuring out how to even read where you are and how to move it around. It's very cumbersome, and I can imagine most players don't even use it, falling back on the waypoint button instead. There's this mindset people have with most adventure games, where having a waypoint telling you exactly where to go frees up one's ability to explore. If the waypoint is telling me to go that way, I'll go this way instead. I've never really liked that point of view though. How likely is someone to find a secret node room, for example, just by using context clues, landmarks, the physical environment in front of them? Slim. The map system even has the waypoint on it at all times, so even solely relying on the map is going to tell you exactly where to go. I find it odd, mostly because so much work was put into the game world. It kind of feels like this super hand-holdy guidance system was added in at the last minute. Like, why go God mode in designing one of the most well well-realized and realistically laid out world ever seen in a game, just to be like, oh, ignore all those signs, just go that way. Now, it does make sense from a narrative perspective that Isaac would have this. Data is being uploaded to his suit by Kendra, who resides in a computer mainframe for most of the game, which means she knows where everything is, which also means he would know where everything is. Judging by some of Isaac's internal thoughts, he also knew a lot of people who worked on this ship. It's very likely he's been here before. I just don't totally jive with this design decision personally. I wish there was a guidance-free option and a 2D map setting that let me figure out where to go all by my own, strengthening that classic sense of survival horror discovery. It's not a game killer by any means, it's a nitpick at best. I just think it detracts from the amazingly well-crafted levels Redwood Shores worked tirelessly on to bring to life. But yeah, that's Dead Space's gameplay. This title is a fantastic revitalization of survival horror. At times, it feels like RE4 on steroids, without ever losing its sense of identity though. The horror may not be for everyone. When things hit the fan, they hit extremely hard. But there's no denying what's here will frighten you and probably make your soul leave its body for a few minutes. Okay, with that said, it's time to get back into the story. Dead Space's story is as multi-layered as its gameplay, and very well told. I'm gonna get into spoilers, so if you want to skip over this and go into the game fresh, please jump to the time on screen. There are 3 pieces to this story playing out all at the same time, and digging into each of them is what's required to paint an accurate picture of what happened on this derelict mining vessel. So let's start with Isaac's side of the story. Isaac Clarke is a silent protagonist, and although he never says anything out loud, that doesn't mean he isn't a character. As you progress, your objective log updates in real time. It's actually written in Isaac's voice. As mentioned earlier, Isaac had friends that worked on this ship and is obviously scared of the monsters he's forced to fight against, some of those being his departed friends. Through really subtle details, some I'll get into later, you can sense his stress building through his animations. Isaac's secondary goal is to find his girlfriend, Nicole Brennan. Nicole was stationed on the Ishimura as a senior medical officer. At the start of this mysterious outbreak, she worked hard to save as many of the crew as she could. Clearly, her efforts were in vain, given the current state of the ship. When Isaac rediscovers her, the reveal of Nicole being alive actually caught me off guard. Before this, Isaac would see her on screens and get odd one-sided calls from her. I really thought Isaac was buckling under the immense stress of facing off against hordes of monsters while single-handedly repairing this giant ship. But no, there she was, just out of reach but very much alive. Their first encounter sees Isaac having to defend his lover from a group of necromorphs trying to stop her from disabling the lock to a storage shed. This moment is happening in real time, but the nature of it always struck me as bizarre. These mindless creatures are trying to stop someone from doing something so basic, so human. After collecting a vital piece of equipment, Nicole seemingly disappears, walking off as if Isaac isn't a top priority to her. It's a suspicious encounter that does raise a lot of questions to the legitimacy of this event. Did that really happen, or was I imagining it? The next time we see Nicole in person is towards the end of the game, where we are right next to her. She is real, she is here, and acting very unnatural.
You can pilot the shuttle remotely from here. Make us whole again. Make us whole again.
I'm gonna put a pin in this story for now, but let's move on to the next piece of this puzzle. Our 2 Kellion crew members, Hammond and Kendra, are like a mental tug-of-war for Isaac's trust. Like you've seen, these 2 don't get along. You might be thinking, hey, they're also stressed out. No one going into this mission was ready for the horrors that awaited them. But then weird things start happening. Early on, Kendra and Hammond split up, exploring different parts of the ship. At times, either of these 2 will lose contact with us. Strange death-defying things will happen, and then all of a sudden, oh, we've reestablished comms with Kendra. I wonder where she was this whole time. It's a constant game of each party outdoing the other on the sus scale. They will, without saying it directly, beg you to trust them. You'll be like, man, Hammond is very pushy, but that's who he is. He's a soldier just dealing with the situation in the way he knows best. But he also jettisoned an escape pod with a necromorph on it that was picked up by our reinforcements and promptly destroyed our only escape. Did he do that on purpose? Kendra's a total ice queen that doesn't like anyone, but hey, why would she betray me while also telling me exactly what to do to fix the ship? She's helping me and herself survive, right? All of this comes to a head when about halfway through the story, Hammond dies. He gets owned so hard. Funny thing is, Kendra isn't too broken up about it.
I just lost all of Hammond's vitals. Is he dead? Oh God. It's just us now, Isaac.
Being on a ship stranded in space with two people you don't know you can trust, while flesh-ripping monsters try ripping you to shreds, adds so much to this game's wildly intimidating vibe. To go back to what one of the original intentions for this game's story was, to create one hell of a hopeless atmosphere, everything is falling apart before your eyes. And speaking of that, the third piece to this story is one that happens mostly off-screen before we arrive at this station. The Ishimura's recent mission to planet crack Aegis 7 resulted in the uncovering of an ancient artifact known as the Marker. Littered throughout the ship are various files from all kinds of staff that detail the fall of the Ishimura and the start of the necromorph outbreak. We get to find some of these crewmen, but they aren't doing so well.
He's here. Nothing to be afraid of. I knew you would come. Just like you said.
As we learn more about the mission, we learn more about this marker. It emits a strange signal. This eerie frequency has various effects on the human mind. Insomnia, extreme depression, and dementia. The worst symptom an affected human can deal with is the rewriting of one's genetic code, resulting in a necromorph. It only took a few people getting mutated to infect the entire ship. Listening to the crew's audio logs, you can hear this downward spiral. One man who made it particularly far was the Ishimura's own engineer, Jacob Temple. This guy walked a very similar path to Isaac, trying his best to fix parts of the ship while also searching for his girlfriend stationed here. Jacob's log trail eventually leads to his death that we happen to witness firsthand. His death caused by another human named Chalice Mercer. This guy is insane, worshipping the necromorphs and sending an unkillable slasher after Isaac. It's kind of like a nemesis. The final battle with this thing was giving so much RE3 energy, literally nuking this thing with industrial spacecraft engines to finally put it down was hella satisfying. Mercer was one of the loudest voices during the fall of the Ishimura, convincing many of the staff to give in to the necromorph infection. Those who didn't willingly, he forced. Just an overall scumbag. But don't worry, he also gets turned into what he worshipped the most. An easily killable piece of shit that dies unceremoniously by Isaac's hand. There is another survivor who's been tailing Isaac in the shadows, observing everything we've been up to. A man named Terrence Kine. Luckily for us, Kine isn't insane. He shows us a video of a massive creature that was awakened at the center of Aegis 7. But Kine believes it to be the actual hive mind of these creatures. His goal is to return the marker to the planet in the hopes of stopping the necromorph assault. When you eventually find the marker, it appears to us in the most intimidating way. I've always loved the musical sting that punctuates this ancient object's reveal. Everything's been building to this moment. This thing is the reason why the Ishimura fell, the reason why everyone went insane, and the reason why we're here right now. Helping Kine load the marker into his ship, we finally meet up with him and...
Where are you going?
Sorry, Isaac. I couldn't let him go through with it. I suppose I should thank you for finding the marker. We even managed without help from the USM Valor. Thank you for helping me find him, by the way. My department's been looking for this place for a long time. See what Kind didn't know was? It was the government's mess to begin with. This whole planet is one big experiment.
Now that we've collected every piece to this story, the truth is revealed to us. Kendra is actually working as an undercover government agent. She was sent on this mission to obtain this red marker, this particular artifact actually being a human-made copy buried here on Aegis 7, designed after a marker found on Earth.
Then they brought it to Aegis 7 and activated it. And you've seen the result. The stuff of nightmares. They sealed the system, and no one would have been the wiser.
Kendra leaves Isaac stranded on the Ishimura, but Nicole finally shows up again, helping Isaac bring Kendra's ship back with the Ishimura's tractor beam. Together, Isaac and Nicole return the marker back to the planet, but it's here where more truth is uncovered.
Thank you, Isaac. I always believed in you. I knew you'd return to me. We are whole again, Isaac. We are whole.
I've played this game so many times over the years, and even now, my heart still drops seeing this ghostly hallucination of Nicole stepping out from behind the marker. This reveal recontextualizes Isaac to me. You can read his silence in many different ways. Obviously, from a gameplay perspective, Isaac being a silent protagonist makes for a perfect stand-in for the player. But in terms of the story, maybe he's confident in his abilities and doesn't need to say anything to the remaining crew. Maybe he's lost his mind, so much so that he literally can't speak and voice his fears or frustrations, a sort of marker-induced trance. There are a lot of hints at him losing his mind throughout the story, the obvious ones being him seeing Nicole on monitors and her just being in front of him. It's even more soul-crushing thinking about this silent guy seeing a hallucination of his girlfriend and not saying anything about it. It's almost like he knows it's not real, but it's what he wants to believe, and we don't know that yet, but that's what makes it so terrible. The chapter names even spell out Nicole is dead, and while there's no way the player would know that on a first playthrough, it kind of acts like a meta way of Isaac already knowing the truth but not telling us. Even in the very first level of the game, there's something that indicates Isaac losing grip on his sanity. On my recent playthrough, I discovered this, and it kinda blew my mind. In the first bathroom you can explore, Isaac hears voices. It goes to show how powerful the influence of the marker is. He spent literal minutes aboard this ship and was seemingly infected instantly. It's so depressing. A massive force of energy blasts from the returned artifact, releasing giant tethers holding up the cracked tectonic fragment of the planet, forcing it back down to the surface. As Isaac escapes, he's trapped by Kendra in a decontamination chamber where she shows the silent engineer Nicole's distress call, this time playing it out in full.
Strange. Such a little thing. In the end, it all comes down to this one little thing. I didn't want it to end like this. I really wanted to see you again. Just once. I loved you. I always loved you.
Isaac's defeated facepalm says everything we need to know in this moment. Kendra runs off, and we begin our last escape from Aegis 7. Returning to the ship, we see Kendra finally getting her comeuppance, as the hive mind slaughters her. Isaac, getting knocked down, stands back up to this nightmare one last time. After a long struggle against this creature, Isaac comes out on top, escaping the planet just in time as the tectonic fragment makes contact with Aegis 7. Nicole's video starts playing as Isaac removes his helmet. Drained from this insane journey, he quietly stops the video. I love Dead Space and its story so much. It's not every day you get to play a game that feels like it cut nothing out of its narrative. With all of its files, impeccable environmental storytelling, and main characters that all have different backgrounds and specialties, it feels like you're in a legit living world. The way Dead Space tells its story mostly through gameplay that you have control over creates an amazing sense of immersion. Like the inventory screen, you're always in it. I also love how the camera never leaves Isaac's shoulder, essentially making Dead Space a full one-shot game. Only at the end is when the camera finally leaves Isaac. This makes sense because we no longer have control over him, and neither does he over his own mind. Listen guys, I play a lot of survival horror games, and aside from titles like Silent Hill, a handful of REs, and a few stragglers here and there, you don't really come across a lot of titles in this genre that have stories this well made at an, at the time, AAA budget. There isn't a single event in this game that feels like it doesn't belong. It's a testament to proper story planning and in-game objective alignment in the early stages of development. Also, there aren't many AAA horror games that are so open-ended like this. Again, aside from Silent Hill. I promise you all, I will talk at great lengths about SH one day. Please give me some time. Those games are labyrinths. What was I talking about again? Looking in mirrors, Robbie the Rabbit, Foreskin. I just kinda love everything about Dead Space. That's why I made this video. It's fun looking back on the era this title released in. It was kind of a perfect storm, EA Redwood Shores, eventually rebranding to the appropriately named Visceral Games, just being in the right place at the right time. Dead Space started its development at the release of RE4, and in a lot of ways, it feels like a classic RE game in its exploration and environmental storytelling, just with 4 as its mechanical core. Like I said earlier though, it never loses its own identity in its inspirations. It is definitively Dead Space. At this point in time, RE was going in a wild new direction, while Dead Space releases as a slower survival horror game with a captivating story tying everything you do in it together. This title released at a turning point for the games industry as well. Where games like Uncharted and Gears of War began to shape the status quo, Dead Space still felt like a game from the early 2000s, just using the tech of 2008. Arriving on the scene with its world, story, gameplay, and vibe being so well thought out that from the start you feel like you're stepping into an already existing universe, despite this being the introduction to this world. It's no surprise that at its release, Dead Space won countless awards. It would obviously go on to become a full-fledged franchise, with sequels, side games, comics, and even animated movies. We'll obviously talk about the sequels at a later date, but I also wanted to mention that this title, 14 years later, is actually getting a next-gen, current-gen remake soon as of the recording of this video. This remake is actually doing something out of the ordinary, where the developers are documenting a lot of the recreation of this legendary game publicly. This doesn't happen often, so it's really cool to see. The devs of this remake seem like big fans of the original and are trying to do some interesting things to improve upon the survival horror experience, while also keeping the soul of the original alive. I personally think they have some gigantic boots to fill with this remake, given how well the original has aged. I literally played it 4 times for this video. It's not totally necessary, but I'm sure it'll be great. I mean, it is a remake of Dead Space, an already amazing video game, so how bad could it really be? Coincidentally, another exciting title coming out very soon, as of the recording of this video, is Glenn Schofield's next survival horror game, the Callisto Protocol. Callisto looks a lot like a spiritual successor to the original Dead Space. Where the remake has gigantic boots to fill, Callisto has a legacy spanning 14 years to follow up on. Judging from its marketing, it looks like Schofield and his team at Striking Distance Studios are going to innovate on Dead Space's formula once again. To be honest, I'm more hyped for this game than I am Dead Space Remake. I mean, Callisto is about a prisoner trying to escape a moon base while surviving hordes of mutated monsters. Sound familiar? We might be getting the actual Dead Space soon, and I can't believe it. If you haven't played Dead Space yet, you've got your options. PC, OG Xbox, Series S/X, and PS3. The remake is also coming out very soon, so there's that too. It's one of the most brutal AAA games ever made, and a title that helped revitalize survival horror in the early 2000s for a little while longer. So what's it gonna be? Do you have the spine to venture into the dead of space and overcome your fears? Whatever you do, don't follow the sounds of those soothing voices in your head. You won't like what you'll find in the deep, dark, dead space. All right, time to take this thing off. Oh my God. Wow. How do I look?